Welcome to episode 4 of the Lessons of Leaders Hospitality podcast, where it is my job to help industry leaders and influencers talk the walk so others can walk the talk. This podcast is for young professionals by young professionals, and thank you for joining me on this week's episode, Instilling Hart from the Start at James Madison University's Hart School. I am joined by a very special mentor, professor, and guest today, the Assistant Director of the Hart School, Professor Neil Marrin. Please enjoy. He was my first hospitality professor at JMU, and every time I come into his office to ask a question or get feedback on something, the questions always get flipped around back on me. And so I'm super excited to be the one actually asking the questions this time.
I'll try not to do that too much. This is your interview.
Hopefully, yeah, since I've set guidelines and rules for this podcast and live. So to start things off, as I let you know, what does the term hospitality mean to you?
When I think of hospitality, and I tell students this as they go out into the world, reminded of the quote by Maya Angelou, and that is that she writes, "People will not always remember what you said. People will not always remember what you do, but people will always remember the way you made them feel." And to me, that's the definition of hospitality, that regardless of whether our students are going into lodging, restaurants, country clubs, cruise lines, it's how they make their guest feel, that guest feels welcomed, that guest feels at home, that guest feels that they're a priority. So to me, that quote, it's not what you say to them, it's not what you do for them, but it's how you make them feel, really, to me, defines hospitality.
And that is something, that I found when I came and visited your office and sitting in class the first time, is being able to evoke that feeling. Is there anything you focus on or pay attention in other people to be able to bring that out? It's a very sort of broad gray area.
For me, it comes down to having the care and concern for others. And if you don't have that, then you shouldn't be in this industry. No matter what these industries, no matter what we can teach you, if you don't have that basic desire to help and be there for people, then you're in the wrong field.
Agreed. And exemplifies service. So how did you end up at JMU? I know that's a fun story.
Yeah, I actually served worked in the recreation field, community recreation, for over 20 years, and started teaching as an adjunct at City University of New York, and came into my office one day in my regular job, and my executive secretary came in, and she said, she closed the door. And I always tell students in a management class that when an employee closes the door, it usually means it's a problem. Then she sat down next to me and she said, Neil, you're a really nice guy, but, she said, you're much nicer on Thursday mornings. You're happier. You're full of energy. What's happening on Wednesday nights? And I realized what was happening on Wednesday nights was I was teaching as an adjunct. And I realized that even though I was successful in my career and I loved what I did because it was an area of service, that my passion was teaching. So at the age of 52, I decided what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I found this position at JMU to teach at the Hart School of Hospitality, Sport and Recreation Management. And the rest is history. Came down here. I've been here for 8 years. Never looked back. It's been the greatest decision of my life, which helps me inform my students about how important it is in your career to find something you're passionate about.
In making that change, what was the biggest thing? Was there anything that held you back from making that decision to transfer?
I was at the height of my career when I left, making much more money than I'm making now. Took a dramatic salary cut. Left an area, New York, where I lived almost my whole life, to come to an area that I knew nothing about, Harrisonburg, Virginia. And I'm embarrassed to say that I didn't even know James Madison University at the time. Another lesson I try to teach my students, and I believe the author's name is Neil Marrin, but it's life begins at the end of your comfort zone. life really opens up. The adventures begin when you step beyond your comfort zone. I didn't know the expression then. As I teach it to my students now, I realized, wow, I did that.
Right.
It was a big leap. I know there were people, family and friends, who thought I was crazy, but I had decided that I wasn't going to wait till I retired to
Right.
pursue what I was really passionate about.
Right. And that's a big reason why I asked the question. Retirement's about 10 years away if you follow that regular timeline. And you're starting, you knew what you wanted to do when you grew up.
And I'll tell you, in all honesty, had I stayed in my old career, as much as it was rewarding, I probably would have looked at retirement 10 years from now.
Okay.
Now, I don't even want to think about it. I'm having too much fun.
The definition has changed.
Yeah, very much so.
Got it. So what excites you the most? You sort of touched on this, but what excites you the most about what you do here at JMU teaching?
It's interesting because when I taught as an adjunct in New York, I knew I loved being in the classroom. There was no question about that. It was a commuter school, and I was an adjunct, so you really didn't have office hours. So the one thing I didn't realize about teaching was the relationship you have with your students outside the classroom, which I have found to be extremely rewarding. Helping students with resumes and internships and job searches, helping them through life.
That's fine.
But the thing that I enjoy most, or the thing that, I shouldn't say that, I enjoy all aspects of that. One of the things that means the most to me is this: having former students of mine come back and connect. That means the world to me. Recently I had the pleasure of going to a wedding of a former student in Dayton, Ohio. He seemed so honored that I was there, but I was even more honored that he thought to invite me.
To invite you.
The relationship you and I have, those are the things that mean the most to me, those lifetime relationships that have come out of this.
And I want to touch on the reason I came in was because you offered in class to come in, and mainly because you have Starbursts and chocolate Hershey Kisses in here. But and I figured, well, I need some help and direction right now, and he's offered Andy his candy. I'll go sit down for half an hour and see what you have to say.
You'd be surprised at Starburst.
It does bring people in? Okay. That's like someone just said, you'd be amazed at what people do for a free shirt. So that's a different project. Anyway, so when you offer that, and I know Dr. Warner does the same thing, how often do you see people follow through with that? And, is there any consistent themes and topics or...
It depends on the level of the student, where they
Okay.
are. So I tend to find that freshmen will come in here because they want to connect.
Okay.
They may be away from home for the first time. They may have issues adjusting to college life. So very often it's just because they want to connect. I think one of the challenges for freshmen is that before they come to college, many of them have this image of college professors as being above them and very distant,
Right.
Almost somewhere on a pedestal. And I think it's really important for us to connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things I found in teaching that's been a nice surprise is sometimes the thing that means the most to a student is simply for them to know you care. So very often my freshmen will come in because they want to connect with somebody, or they may want to learn more about the different segments of the industry. My upper level students and my grad students, well, my upper level students probably more so for guidance in their career, or as far as starting their career.
Mm-hmm.
How do they do the ultimate resume? What should they look at in an opportunity for a job? How do they determine whether a company is the right fit for them? How do they prepare for an interview? So with the upper level students, very often it's in that realm. With my grad students, it's completely different. With my grad students, it's more bringing issues to me or seeking advice on things that are relative to their jobs, because many of my grad students are graduate assistants or they have full-time jobs, and so that changes. So I think depending on where the student is in school, that connection is different.
Okay. And to the freshmen coming in, what's one piece of advice that you usually relay over to them?
One of the things I tell them is to enjoy your college experience. It sounds funny coming from a professor to say that everything is not about academics. this is the only time they'll experience college life in their lifetime, probably. Certainly the only time they'll experience it as an undergrad. So I tell them to really make sure there's a balance in what they do. The other thing I try to get across to them, and this is true in any profession, when I was in my previous profession, I did a lot of hiring. Most of the people I hired were between, I would say, 16 and 25. If you came into me for a full-time position and you had just graduated college and you had a 4.0 GPA in college and you had nothing on your resume, and another student came in and they had a 3.2 GPA, but they had a resume that they developed in college that included leadership in student organizations, part-time jobs in my industry, or part-time jobs at all, which indicates that they want to work. If they showed me that, that was the student that got hired, not the one with the 4.0 GPA. And I know when I tell this to students, especially when we deal with open houses here at the university, I think sometimes parents cringe when I say you don't need the 4.0. But I encourage students to do well academically, but they have to be more well-rounded. One, to enjoy their college life, and two, to really be more competitive when they graduate. One of the things we try to teach, and it's true for any college, and any college should be doing this, especially in our industries, is preparing the students when they graduate to be more competitive. How can they be more competitive? Part of it is having a well-rounded resume when they graduate, not just a transcript.
Not just a transcript. So when people are graduating and still coming into your office, what do you share with that person? Is it any different?
In great part, first I talk to them about making sure to have a work-life balance. That's important. I generally will talk to them about looking for a fit when they go to when they look at a job offer. Making sure that, well, the money may be great at this company, but are you more comfortable fitting into this company? Does that company hold more to your values in life? Because the bottom line is, yes, you want to make a living, but it's much nicer making a living working in an organization where you feel that you're part of it, you're part of their mission, you share the same values. It helps you sleep better at night. And the other thing that's a big one is that, going back to that expression, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. I'll never forget having a student come in, and she had a possibility of an internship after graduating in Alaska at Denali National Park. And I got so excited for her, and I said, "When do you start?" She said, "I'm not doing it." I said, "Why not?" She said, "Because it's too far away." And I looked at her, and I said, "When you're 40 and have a mortgage and possibly kids, are you going to spend the summer in Alaska? Now's the time to do it." So I try to encourage students to really step beyond their comfort zone now. I had a student who took a year after he graduated to go to New Zealand, and I'll never forget bringing him back to speak to our students about what life was like. And at first he was hesitant if I really wanted him, because he didn't go out into industry right away.
Right.
And I said, "No, I want them to hear what you did. What you did was brave, and what you did is going to be something that others may never experience in a lifetime. You had the courage to do it." So that's usually how I advise students as they're going out in the world.
And to touch back on the point in searching for the right values, not the right paycheck, is there was a book I was reading recently that said something along the lines of 68% of people, given the choice to replace their boss or get a pay raise, would replace their boss. So find that position that's worth it with the leadership.
Well, I think you might remember the number 88,000. Do you remember that? Okay, so I tell students when they come into my freshman class, I put the number 88,000 on the wall. And I ask them, what does that mean to them? And very often they'll say, "Oh, that'll be our starting salary." And I say, "No, if you think that, you need to move over to finance or economics, but not hospitality." 88,000 is the minimum number of hours you're going to work in your lifetime. And I ask students, once they know that, how should that inform you? If you know you're spending 88,000 hours of your life, and that's minimal, that's probably a lie in the hospitality industry, because it'll be far more than that. But assuming you retire at like 65, that's the minimal you'll work. If you know that, how should that inform you? you better find something that either you find greatly satisfying or find something that you can make greatly satisfying to you. So that whole concept of replacing your boss versus getting a raise goes to that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have to find satisfaction, you have to find some joy, you have to find, you have to feel like you're growing and making a positive difference in the job.
What would you say is the biggest misconception that students come in with to the hospitality program or go into the industry with?
I think there are two things. One is I don't think they realize often when they come in the number of hours that are involved. Because in the hospitality industry, you're working when other people have off.
Right.
You're working to bring them joy and pleasure and fun. So the hours, and that's a big challenge with work-life balance, but the hours can be long, but the hours could also be different. So even if you come into a hospitality industry position where you're working 40 or 50 hours, which is unusual, very often you're working nights and weekends, which is a challenge. And I think students aren't always aware of that. But the other misconception I find is that students often don't realize the breadth of the hospitality industry.
Right.
So very often we'll get students in that say, I want to be a wedding planner, probably because they've seen the movie with that Jennifer Lopez.
I forget
Yeah,
also.
but they've probably seen the movie.
Yeah.
So they come in thinking that's hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
Our responsibility as hospitality educators is to share with them all the other options that are out there in hospitality industries.
And that's something I haven't touched on much with these interviews. And I love the answers to what does hospitality mean to you, because everyone so far has brought out an emotion that the hospitality industry evokes and what it's really all about. But on paper, it's I remember it as FETA, food and beverage, entertainment, travel, and accommodations. Is that generally right on?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much
things?
covers it all.
Right.
You know, because every industry falls within there somewhere.
Took a big step saying that in front of a
Good.
professor.
Good.
So okay, good.
Task.
All right. The to wrap things up, what would you say is the role of universities within the hospitality industry?
I think part of our role goes back to what I just said as far as students coming in with misconceptions, and that is to expand their view of hospitality, what's out there for them. We're even seeing now residential services working in residential organizations with residential companies was not specifically considered part of the hospitality industry. We're seeing it more and more to be considered that. We consider it that. But I think part of our role is to expand their knowledge of what hospitality includes. And then part of our role is to give them the tools they need to be successful. Again, a lot of success in this industry depends on their desire to serve others. That's hard to instill in somebody, but we can give them the tools. How to provide good customer service, how to deal with the financial aspects, how to deal with the human resources aspects of the hospitality industry. A good program gives them the experiential learning component too. I would suggest to you in our program, students are required to have 1,000 hours of experience in the industry before they graduate. I would suggest that many hospitality programs do something similar, maybe not as many hours, but I believe it's really one of the most vital things we can do for our students. There are just so many things you could teach in a classroom and teach out of a textbook.
Right.
Much of that learning, the important learning, is going on when they're doing an internship in a hotel or a restaurant, spending their summers working, in a country club. That's where they're going to relate to professionals and they're going to relate to clients and guests. So.
And that goes back to the breadth you were talking about in the hospitality industry, and there's so much people don't realize that can be covered in the classroom. The experience is where you start to get the depth in that
Absolutely.
piece. Well, thank you very much for the time,
It was truly a pleasure.
Looking forward to getting this up and moving on with Lessons of Leaders.